Captain Marvel introduced fans of the MCU to the Skrulls, an alien species who have the ability to shapeshift into any existing being. This makes them experts of infiltration, as your friend or colleague may suddenly be replaced, and you'd have no idea, as the Skrulls are masters of deception. In the comics, the Skrulls took over the bodies of numerous Marvel heroes in an event known as Secret Invasion. Could the Skrulls play a similar role in Endgame? Let's find out! Before we can talk about what the Skrulls may be doing in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we first need to break down who the Skrulls are in both the MCU and the comic books. Captain Marvel was a pretty massive hit for Marvel, so it's safe to say that most people are familiar with the MCU's version of them. They don't differ too much when compared to their comic book counterparts. The Skrulls originated from the Andromeda Galaxy, and are also a group of alien shapeshifters. In the comics, the Skrulls were fierce warriors, and more importantly, colonizers. They formed the largest empire in the history of the entire galaxy, after conquering and colonizing almost 1,000 different races. But not every Skrull was critical in helping form their military might. The Skrulls, along with humans and Kree, share a common ancestor in the Zorians. In the beginning, the Skrulls were pretty powerless, and normal until the Celestials found them 100 million years ago. This is where things get interesting. The Celestials divided the Skrulls into 3 distinct subspecies: Prime Skrulls, who are the default powerless Skrulls, the Deviant Skrulls, who are the Skrulls you're most familiar with, and the Eternal Skrulls, who were blessed with superpowers and longer lifespans. Naturally, this change in their genealogies created dissension, and it wasn't long until war broke out between all 3 Skrull species, with the Deviant Skrulls vanquishing the other 2. This means that all Skrulls that are alive today are descendant from the Deviant strand. In the comics, the Skrulls launched a massive campaign on Earth in the form of the Secret Invasion crossover event. This is where the Skrulls replaced such heroes as Spider-Woman, Hank Pym, Black Bolt, Elektra, and the male version of Captain Marvel. Many people wanted to take over the Earth at some point in time, but due to the number of superpowered heroes that lived on the planet, that proved easier said than done. The Skrulls, however, being a conquering kind of species, believed that the planet was rightfully theirs. They just needed to take it in a less aggressive manner. For years, they would slowly start replacing heroes on Earth with a Skrull imposter, and let them function as their human counterpart would normally act for years on end. Spider-Woman was the first to be replaced prior to the events of House of M, a widely popular arc that launched in 2005, 10 years before Secret Invasion would release. This is evidence enough that the Skrulls are a patient species, willing to wait years in order to execute their plans, preferring to use slow, manipulative tactics to catch their targets off guard. Considering the MCU film Captain Marvel took place in '95 and introduced Earth to the Skrulls, could the Skrulls have begun an infiltration campaign 13 years before Tony Stark announced to the world that he was Iron Man? Let's start by looking at Nick Fury, who played a critical role in Captain Marvel and thus was one of the first humans to interact with the Skrulls. In the movie, Fury is a young, uncertain agent who starts the film sporting 2 eyes. By the end of the flick, Carol Danvers inspires Fury to stick around with S.H.I.E.L.D. and become the director and begin planning out the Avengers initiative. But was the Fury we saw in Captain Marvel the same Fury who brought the Avengers together in 2012? A scene in Age of Ultron may have revealed Fury to be an imposter. Early on in Captain Marvel, Vers has become seriously paranoid about the idea of Skrull imposters, and quizzes Fury to prove he's who he says he is by revealing a private detail about himself that no one would know. See, the Skrulls take on some of the memories of their host when they transform, but it's not the most reliable means of deception, as a personal detail may get muddled and lost. So Fury abides and tells her and the audience a private detail that nobody else would know about: that he can't eat toast that's been cut diagonally. However, in Age of Ultron, when the Avengers are laying low at Hawkeye's farm, Fury gives a speech to the team while eating toast that's been cut diagonally. Now let's get the obvious out of the way. Yes, this could be an oversight from the Marvel guys. After all, it's quite possible they weren't keeping track of teeny tiny minute details like how Fury was eating his food in Age of Ultron. We also have to point out that it's hard to tell if the bread has been toasted, and Fury was very specific about the toasting part. But also, Fury's private detail was just too specific, and also lines up with something that Fury specifically done before in a past movie. Besides, Fury isn't exactly known for having too many standout tics and mannerisms. He is a master spy after all. Then there's also the fact that there's a 4th Skrull unaccounted for in Captain Marvel's film. So it's very possible that this missing Skrull ended up replacing Nick Fury. The book Captain Marvel: The Art of the Movie shows that the filmmakers were definitely considering Fury being a Skrull. There's art that shows the Skrull transforming into modern-day looking Fury over the course of 8 panels, which suggests that the idea was definitely in place. Whether the idea was completely abandoned or kept under wraps for a reveal later in the MCU remains to be seen. If Fury is actually a Skrull, one has to ask, why? It's pretty late in the Marvel Cinematic Universe at this point, and we know Fury will return in Spider-Man: Far From Home to work with Peter Parker. But perhaps that's all part of the plan, and the Skrulls are playing a decade-long waiting game. Despite appearing in Captain Marvel only thus far, Marvel boss Kevin Feige has stated that the Skrulls will return at some point in the MCU. Whether that's Phase 4 or beyond remains to be seen, but they will be back, and there will be a purpose for their return. But if there's a chance Fury is a Skrull, is it possible that other Avengers or Avenger allies may be Skrulls too, and we just haven't been told about it yet? The possibilities are certainly there, so let's take a look at the characters that are most likely imposters prior to the events of Endgame. Captain Marvel set up some ground rules on the Skrulls, and one of those rules is that a Skrull may be able to copy someone down to the molecular level, but they can't duplicate somebody's superpowers. So there's absolutely no way someone like Thor is a Skrull, for instance. But there are plenty of people in the MCU who don't rely on superpowers to get the job done. The Skrulls also need to be able to see someone in order to transform. So let's get some of the obvious ones out of the way. If Fury is a Skrull, then there's a good chance his most trusted confidant, Maria Hill, is also a Skrull. Unlike some of the other major characters who get a lot of screen time and have a passionate fan base, Hill is a character that shows up every now and again in the MCU, and just helps out. But we really don't know much about her other than that Fury trusts her. If she has been a Skrull since her introduction in 2012's Avengers film, it wouldn't anger fans to know that we've been watching an imposter this entire time, as we're not invested in the character. Hill is an ideal candidate to be a Skrull, as she's a high-ranking member of S.H.I.E.L.D. and has also worked her way into Stark Industries. She has access to a bunch of highly classified intelligence and would be a logical, perhaps a bit too obvious, candidate to be an imposter. Likewise, Sharon Carter fits the mold to be a Skrull quite a bit. We're not too familiar with the character aside from her 2 appearances in Winter Soldier and Civil War, and yet we do know she's a trusted and valuable member of S.H.I.E.L.D., and now a ranking officer in the CIA. Carter is in the perfect position to gather intel for the Skrulls while also getting close to the Avengers. But what makes more sense is for the Skrulls to replace Carter's boss in the CIA, Everett Ross. Ross was first introduced in Captain America: Civil War, and was basically calling the shots in the Bucky Barnes case in that movie. He was later a key character in Black Panther, so he's not only embedded himself into the government, but has become a powerful and trusted ally to the Wakandan kingdom. Now let's talk about the most likely candidate in the entire MCU who could be a Skrull. He's alive in Avengers Endgame, so be sure to keep an eye on him during the events of that movie. That person is the Avenger known as War Machine. Let's look at the information and assess why it's actually quite possible for Rhodey to be an imposter. Rhodey started his career in the military, an ideal position of power for a Skrull to infiltrate. Fortunately for them, Rhodey was also a very good friend with Tony Stark, who would quickly reveal himself to be Iron Man. It wasn't long before Stark decided to trust his old friend with a suit of his own in Iron Man 2, which made way for him becoming Iron Patriot for a bit in Iron Man 3. From there, Rhodey would go on to be known as War Machine and become part of the Avengers, assimilating himself seamlessly with the world's most powerful superheroes. Just like Tony, Rhodey has no actual powers, so it's quite easy for a Skrull to replace him. He's also a minor character when everything is said and done, which makes his possible infiltration less of a betrayal to the fans than if Tony were actually a Skrull. While working with the Avengers, Rhodey had unlimited access to their technology and could easily build up profiles on his teammates, referencing their respective strengths and weaknesses. He also helped fuel the fire during the Civil War conflict, which led to the Avengers breaking apart with Steve Rogers and Tony coming to blows. Fracturing the Avengers was certainly Zemo's plan, but it definitely would be something that the Skrulls would want to see happen. Of all the potential heroes on the roster, Rhodey is definitely the most likely candidate due to his minor position on the team, but also has the trust and ear of its benefactor. The Skrulls are likely going to return at some point or another, whether that's in Captain Marvel 2 or another Phase 4 film, perhaps even Avengers 5. But when they do come, they'll come back as an even bigger threat than they were in the 90s. It's quite possible that the Skrulls slowly began infiltrating the government from that point on with a replacement of Nick Fury, and maybe even made their way to the Avengers roster. It's too early to say for sure, but you can bet we'll be watching these movies a little differently until we know for certain. But what do you think of this Skrull conspiracy? Do you think Nick Fury was replaced due to the toast reveal, or was that just a slip-up from the filmmakers? Do you think anybody else like Ross or Rhodey could also be Skrulls in hiding? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more videos like it in your playlist every day. Thanks for watching.